Hey, Internet, welcome back to another episode of New Foundations, the podcast brought to you by Acropolis, the Bitcoin Treasury company. I'm here again with my co host, Bobby, and we're joined again for another episode of the Advisor Series with Grant Switzer. Grant is going to tell the audience more about his background himself, but I can tell you that Grant has over 35 years of experience in public accounting. He was a partner and very, very happy to have him on our advisory team as our finance and accounting advisor. So, hey, Grant, welcome.
Thanks, Mason. Thanks, Bobby. Good to be here. I really appreciate the invite.
Welcome.
Happy to have you on. I think, like I said, let's go ahead and start with your background. Just give us an overview of your background, and then if you want to, go ahead and talk about your Bitcoin story, how you heard about it, and what makes you interested in it now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, as you said, I'm 35 years in public accounting. I was with two of the big four firms, and I just recently left a few months ago just to be on my own, do some consulting, and have some more time to focus on Bitcoin. So, uh, my professional background, I was what's called an assurance partner. And so most of my day job was auditing. I'd have teams that I would manage that would do the financial audit and I'd be the one signing off on a 10K for public filings. So I spent a lot of time on the larger public companies. That was one of my roles, was just being an audit partner. The other was a lead partner on accounts where we didn't do the audit, but I would oversee whatever projects we might have going on and manage the overall relationship. So that could be IT implementations, finance or digital transformations, could be tax projects, whatever services were being provided. I'd just be that lead partner managing the account. And over the course of 35 years, I'd say there are two areas I really focused on. One, I spent a lot of time in international. I worked with multinational clients. In fact, in 1999, I moved to Singapore. An oil company I was serving moved their headquarters from Dallas to Singapore, so I moved out there with them. And that was a really interesting time. They were in about 70 different countries. And that period of my career, I probably traveled to about 50 different countries, traveling and worked, and just had a lot of international exposure. And the rest of my career, I worked primarily on international and multinational clients. And then the other aspect is I spent a lot of time and I had several assignments in capital markets groups. So 2001, I moved to Hong Kong and lived there for a few years in a capital markets group that covered all the U.S. capital market activity for Asia Pacific. And it was a really exciting time. It was a time when the China state-owned companies were doing their IPOs in the U.S. So the big oil companies and telecom and media and these different state-owned companies were going through a listing process to be public in the U.S. So interesting time. Most recently, I was just in the national office and worked in an SEC group, and so I had a lot of exposure to the regulators and kind of front row seat as to how they were treating this industry as well. But my Bitcoin story is really not related to my professional background. It was more, I've always been a student of finance. Finance is what I studied. And, I entered the workforce right after the 1987 crash. I entered in 88 and there weren't many finance jobs available. And I went into accounting and it turned out it was a great profession and enjoyed it. But I've always had a lot of interest in finance and economics and, managed my own money. And when COVID hit was really when this caught my attention. But it caught my attention twice, actually, two times when it was reaching all-time highs, which is fairly typical, I think, of a lot of people that get into Bitcoin. But in 2017, it shot up from, I think, about 1,000 to 13,000. And I remember looking into it and thinking, I mean, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. No legitimate asset class moves like that. And I thought this was, it's gambling, some funny internet money, or I just kind of dismissed it and wrote it off and and said this can't be legitimate. And then, of course, it comes crashing down, in 2018 and 19, and we had the long winter, and you congratulate yourself, and then that, the confirmation bias sets in, and start reading the negative articles about it, and feeling pretty good about myself. And I didn't give it another thought until 2021, and that's when we were in COVID. I was really reading up and talking to people about our debt, the federal debt and deficits. And, I thought the great financial crisis, that was a lot of stimulus with 840 billion. And then what we did in COVID just dwarfed it. It was 5 trillion of additional stimulus, or what I equate to money printing. And I just couldn't get a good answer on, how will this end? It seemed, really, I guess I concluded that this is going to result in a long and sustained inflation period, high inflation. So I'd already had this mindset of a hard asset. In fact, I had started buying some land. That was my answer to it, was to get some. It was just outside a growing metropolitan area. Of course, land is finite, and we had more demand with this growing area. So that made a lot of sense to me. So when somebody suggested to me, I wish I could remember who it was, but read the Bitcoin standard. Bitcoin might be an answer to what you're looking for. And as soon as I read it, the light bulb came on, and you know how it is. I went hard and fast down the rabbit hole, just trying to learn as much as I could, reading what I can. You're listening to podcasts, traveled to conferences, talking to people that had been in the space for a long time. I even made several trips to Washington, D.C. I met with about a dozen congressional offices, both House and Senate, just to hear firsthand how they thought about this. This was the time, of course, before the ETFs were approved, when I still thought there was quite a bit of regulatory risk. But I came away from that, my personal due diligence, just thinking, well, this is not going away. But even, more importantly, this could be to money what the internet was to information. And it's the hardest asset, this finite supply of 21 million. And having been around the oil and gas companies and the oil markets for so long, this supply demand dynamic just made so much sense to me. And oil, several years ago, when you see, it can go up 2x or 3x, and it has some elasticity, right? So you see demand pick up, and OPEC can increase production, and here the shale, these drilled but uncompleted get completed, so the production could come online in a matter of months and try to stabilize, but you still get this 2 to 3x changes in price. And so thinking about Bitcoin, it has no, it's the only asset is the supply is unaffected by demand, right? So it will not be responsive to the changes in demand. Of course, price is the arbiter of supply and demand. So I thought, wow, this, I'm thinking of it in terms of investment only, but this really, has the potential to appreciate substantially. And the other thing that really persuaded me were the demographics. I was reading stories on demographics, and looking at who owned Bitcoin. The over 65 probably owned a negligible amount, just a fraction of 1%. But some of the studies on millennial Gen X, more like 15% of their asset allocation. There was a study that came out recently by one of the big banks that was focused on X and millennials, and what would you do in new money? And their number one investment was crypto. I wish it had said Bitcoin, but it number one place they would put new money was crypto, and 2 was real estate. So the older generations like me are more equity markets, but the younger are looking for alternatives, with crypto being at the top of the list. So you have this generational difference in how they look at it, and the younger people growing up being digitally native and just much more comfortable with a digital gold. And that, and the backdrop is we have the biggest wealth transfer in our nation's history, called the Great Wealth Transfer, right from boomers to the younger generations, and that's expected to be about 80 trillion that is being passed on. So that was, from an investment standpoint, that was very compelling to me. Um, the international aspect too. A lot of my friends and colleagues, I would talk to them about it, and they would dismiss it, or their reasoning would be along the lines of, well, inflation may be coming, but I have other assets that I expect to appreciate with inflation. My banking relationship works fine, my credit cards work fine. I don't really see a need for this. And just, I guess, having lived overseas and traveled in, especially in these places where the oil companies are, they're developing countries, and just seeing the impact of debasement of currency, and how, the more compelling use case might be the international aspect, or even within the U.S., those that don't have assets, right? Inflation is just an insidious, regressive tax, and so I think, while some of the circles I might have been in may not see a compelling use case, I really saw it in, both internationally, um, and this idea of it being permissionless for people that may not have substantial assets. But the most compelling thing for me was, it was the values and the ethos, and the people that it attracts. And that part was surprising to me. I, had thought, going into this, and I could say, prior to really getting to know some of the people involved in Bitcoin, I really looked at this as an investment standpoint. And then, say, after that, I would look at it, the attributes much beyond an investment, right? More of a Bitcoin standard. And so the people aspect, it just surprised me how many, the intelligence, but even more importantly, the high integrity of the people, just wanting to do good. And I remember I was at the Nashville conference this summer, talking to a doctor who's in his mid 60s, and he'd only been in about 6 months, but he'd gone down the rabbit hole quickly and was absorbing as much as he could. But we got in this discussion about the people it was attracting, and he looked around and he said, "Yeah, Bitcoin really aggregates people that want to make the world a better place." And I don't fully understand why, but it's this, it's this single source of truth, and but the people that it's attracting, and the integrity, and the ethos of it is, to me, just so compelling. I mean, I just thought, well, this is a force for good that I think is going to be unstoppable. In fact, that was the what got my wife to come around to it. So, before that, just given the supply demand dynamics and thinking about it as investment, I'm ready to bet the farm. But, like a lot of you, our spouses might moderate us a little bit. And so I was spending time talking to her about it, and she's been incredibly supportive of me. But it was when she met some of the people. She's very intuitive, a counselor, but she met the people involved, and then that clicked for her. She goes, "Well, it's not this gambling, and it's not the guy you see on TV with curly hair and cargo shorts. These are serious people. It's very legitimate." And anyway, when she met the people, that she was on board and very supportive. And it reminds me, in the summers we like to go to this little ski town in Colorado called Telluride, and it's a beautiful town, great skiing, and they have this wonderful little library. And when my kids were young, we would go there, and they would read to them, and they had all these different activities for kids. It's a much better library than you expect in a little small town. And so you see on the bumper stickers, it says, Telluride came to ski, stayed for the library. And I think that's how I feel about Bitcoin is, came for the gains, stayed for the values. And anyway, That's kind of a summary of how I came into the space and to be so constructive on it.
Yeah, Grant, you said a lot of great stuff there. I think I can speak for Bobby in that we both agree, that Bitcoin really does breed the best kinds of people and the best kinds of businesses, which is what we're trying to enable at Acropolis. I'm curious, would you consider yourself before Bitcoin, a very open-minded person? Because I think from the outside looking in, someone who was at Big Four accounting firms, which are well known for being conservative and being very matter of fact, risk averse. So I think it's quite unique for someone in your position to understand Bitcoin so early. I mean, I know it's a meme in the space that we're all so early, but the reality is Bitcoin is still less than 0.1% of the world's assets. So we are very early. So I'm just curious, would you consider yourself a very open-minded person?
I guess at times, I always said I was an accountant by training, not by nature. So I spent a lot of time in the industry, and it is very conservative, risk averse, and that's how I operated with my clients and within the industry. But on a personal level, yeah, I mean, I've always enjoyed exploring, latest trends, and but before I discovered this, I was reading a lot about AI. In fact, I thought after leaving the big firm, I might go in the direction of AI, but I came to the conclusion Bitcoin may be even a bigger idea than AI. So I guess in some respects I am Mason, but maybe in others I'm not. But it's you're right. It's unusual. Really, I don't know any other colleagues that feel about Bitcoin the way I do. So it is unusual. Yeah.
I love hearing the background and story, and not to. I'm 38 and I feel old, but you said you were jumping into the job market in '87, and I was like, wow, that was when I was born. And I love talking to people who just have like a wealth of knowledge through like years that a lot of, like you said, like what is it, big like a Gen Z or millennials, whoever it was, it's like 15% of their portfolio, where those 60 plus it's 1%. It's like young folks are just going like all in on Bitcoin, and like the older
Yeah.
demographic, they've got, like you said, 80 trillion in wealth. I believe 30 trillions in small business, the other 50s in equities or whatever their investments are. So there is a
Yeah.
wealth transfer. And what gets me so excited about Acropolis, coming from a background of small business, is the young generation can acquire these businesses from the baby boomers, and there's a big opportunity to build a Bitcoin balance sheet, or start a business from scratch and grow it and acquire Bitcoin. But I'm just curious from your perspective, Grant, like you've done so much from IPOs, working in global markets, working at big two firms. You've almost had the world beat into you their view of financial markets, like how the world views money, and you've obviously done the work to understand Bitcoin. You've read the Bitcoin Standard. What do you think are like the biggest, like the opposite magnets between the two that make it fight, or why does it seem so unreasonable maybe to like legacy institutions even to have like a fraction of a bit of exposure? And like, answer this how you will, like but hopefully I'm painting a good picture. I think that's like something a lot of folks wrestle with that come from a background like yours, but they
Right.
don't necessarily have the time to invest and go down the rabbit hole, because it is
Right.
pretty labor intensive work.
It is. It is. And I fortunately have had some time recently, and yeah, I think the biggest thing is stigma. I mean, I just think, in fact, I gave a talk a few months ago to a group, very diverse group, that not financial background. There were 28 people in the room, and I asked them all, before I gave a talk, all right, we're going to do word association. What comes to mind when you hear Bitcoin? 26 of the 28 were negative, and two, I'd say, were neutral. And this is just a few months ago, right? So the general population, it's still it was gambling. It's a bubble. It's a Ponzi. It's just, I think there's historically been this stigma. Um, and I think, you mentioned my, having gone through some things, but like the great financial crisis, seeing all the contagion in the market, right? So every day it seemed like you wake up and you learn something about some counterparty risk you weren't aware of, or more leverage in the system, and it was just contagion. So the entire financial industry was affected by this contagion. And I look at Bitcoin and it's running on completely separate rails, right? So, I mean, even in a big crisis, if we were to have a crisis, Bitcoin would be systemically stable, right? It doesn't mean the price won't fall, but your Bitcoin is going to be there, and the system will be stable, and it's completely separate rails, unaffected. So that to me was compelling, but I think most of the world, Bobby, doesn't. They view it as an extension of the traditional financial world, right? So they're looking at it through a traditional lens and saying, here's another asset class where I need to get some exposure to an asset class to generate more fiat, right? And so it's hard to fully grasp Bitcoin until you really put the work in and you're not looking at it as just an investment or something to get some price exposure to. But I continue to think, especially in the big public organizations, that it's more of a stigma thing than anything. Now there are some within the big organization, Mason, you are one, that really get it, right? And they may be talking to the organization about adopting Bitcoin, but there are just still so many barriers, right? A lot of political risk internally in an organization. I mean, you have to move through layers of approvals and governance, and it's not something you convince the treasurer. It's going to the CFO, the CEO, and then ultimately get proposed to the board, and there's some nobody wants to have a misstep and put their career at risk. So it's but you're right. It's so exciting with the we're seeing a lot in this phase and what Acropolis is doing and helping a lot of these family owned or smaller businesses, or those that I would say just don't have those layers of governance, right? They're more autonomous and can make decisions. And so we're in this wave, we're certainly seeing those show interest, family offices. And who knows, the larger corporates could be right behind. It's hard to say if we get this goes up, it'll get attention again. And that's where, I'm excited about Acropolis and being able to help you guys is once this moves into more corporate adoption and just lending, I'd like to think the background in, being an assurance partner. I came from a trust practice, 35 years. So that's just lend some credibility, but also just navigating this, the corporate environment and having done that for so many years and the selling process and managing the communication through these different levels, especially all the way up to the board. I went to quarterly board meetings. I've been to hundreds of board meetings over my career, and it's just seeing how that generation in the boardrooms, it's usually not the youngest folks, and so it's there's a lot of communication. I mean, it still comes back to education, right? There's going to be education at the different levels in the corporate environment, but that's coming, and it could be really soon.
Yeah, I certainly did everything I could to orange pill eBay. For those of you who don't know, I worked at eBay for a few years and just got in front of everyone I could possibly get in front of, from finance to payments to treasury to everyone, and just talked about the benefits of Bitcoin for that respective side of the business. And I think a lot of individuals got it, but there were a lot of hurdles as well. A lot of, like you said,
Sure.
career risk, a lot of preconceived notions, and then technical inability. I think before multi-institution custody and what OnRamp is pioneering in that space, it wasn't possible for corporates to have a meaningful allocation to Bitcoin because you're looking at leaving it on a centralized custodian, whether that be a Coinbase or even an ETF. 90% of those are all with the same custodian as well. And then really thinking about, if I walk into the eBay treasury team with some hardware, plastic devices, it's a non-starter. So I think, yeah, we're really excited to bring this solution that, OnRamp has on top of Acropolis ancillary services and Bitcoin advisory to the market. So that's actually a great segue. Grant, you are involved with Acropolis as an advisor. You advise us on finance and accounting. Just if you could opine a little bit more on, why you ultimately decided to get involved and where you see the landscape going over the next 12 to 18 months for businesses.
Yeah, I mean that was a little bit of what I was talking about of where I see it going is ultimately the larger corporates adopting, but as you know, it's we're seeing more. I mean, with the exception of MicroStrategy, right? And that's just a different corporate governance animal. It's I think Michael Saylor owns about 12% of the equity, but 64% of the voting stock. So he's able to do these things, but very few other large corporates are doing it. We see, there are a few publics, not many, but then I know we're seeing a lot of interest among, the family owned, and those that can make these decisions quickly. But where I see it going is, I think right now we're in the midst, and it's probably still early innings of these, family offices, family businesses, that they're learning about it and able to move on it, where the corporates may be learning about it, but I feel like they're still unable to move because of all the, the stigma, the governance, the layers that they're going to have to go through to get approvals. But I see, if you say 12 to 18 months, I mean, I think there's a very good chance that this cycle we get in, some of the early adopters of the larger public companies, I could see coming on board as we start moving through this cycle. So I think that's what would be really exciting, and that's where I get excited about helping Acropolis too, because that just fits within my background of having worked with these organizations. And you talk about the Treasury and having talked to the Treasury folks, and I come from a more capital intensive background. I worked with a lot of the oil companies over the years, and they're not like the tech companies that have all this cash on their balance sheet. When they're capital intensive, it's usually, if you have excess cash, you're going to do one or two things. You're either going to put it into the business, or you're going to return it to the shareholders through dividends or buybacks. And I think Bitcoin now, I think of it with my former clients as more of a capital allocation decision, right? So now they have a third option of, whether invest in the business, return to shareholders, or buy Bitcoin, which, is close to a 50% CAGR over the however many last 5 to 10 years. So it's, I think it's going to be a capital allocation decision that all organizations really need to go through.
One other thing that I think through often is like you shared just this last week, was it 28 people, 2 had neutral comments. Clearly the Larry Fink marketing campaign hasn't moved the needle too much in the minds of people, but money has flown there. And like you said, the thing that attracted you and your wife and held your attention was the people. So what kind of message does Bitcoin need to say on mainstream media that's different than what's currently being said for the masses to understand it? And I know that's quite challenging to answer, but I'm curious to see what your thought may be on that.
Yeah, what they say on mainstream media, that's a good question. I give thought to maybe we need more of a foundations and nonprofits where we're putting money into communicating these things and what's going on, what's going on with Bitcoin mining in places in Africa, or just there's so many incredible stories that could give, for lack of a better term, give Bitcoin a better PR. Mainstream media, I think just continue to highlight some of the what I call just this force for good that Bitcoin is. It's changing the world in positive ways. We can point that out. there's some studies coming out. Troy Cross has this Nakamoto project, and they put a study out a couple months ago, and it addressed some of these things of morality. It looked at conservative, liberal, but it also looked at Bitcoiners versus non-Bitcoiners in terms of morality, and there was a higher propensity to make decisions based on morals or values among Bitcoiners. So there's hard data starting to come out on that, and Bobby, I'd love to see that disseminated. But for people like my wife, it's going to be with intuitive people and those that aren't going to put in a lot of research, which when this moves to the masses, most probably won't. It's meeting people, right? It's who you know and who they are, right? So it's meeting Bitcoiners really trying to change the world for good, or and then it turns out it's not the gambler Ponzi scheme person you thought it was going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those listening who don't know Troy Cross, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I believe when I heard him speaking, he was a teacher at one of the most liberal schools in America. So he's deep in the weeds, understanding like the difference between both ends of the political spectrum, and he put a really good, clear case and story based on data out about how there's actually more liberal leaning people who've adopted Bitcoin. And that's interesting because often, at least what I think I'm perceiving in the political space right now is it leans conservative, but the data and just where people are actually placing their money tends to say the opposite. So I think that's really cool perspective because like there's no marketing team for Bitcoin, but stories go a long way to convince people of things. And I think we are in a world where people are seeking truth and morality, and it's nice to have something you can lean on that creates a culture of accountability, if you will.
Right.
But yeah, and I guess to bring it back to like the business side, to take that further, like what would you say to like brand new folks who just heard that and they say, I like the moral story, but I'm a business owner. If we're to pivot back to business, like what considerations or things would you say that people should understand about bringing Bitcoin into their business or their decision-making process, considering your knowledge of like traditional finance and now what you know about Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, I think it's similar to what you were saying, Bobby, of how exciting it is having these the small businesses that will be, handed down from boomers to younger generation, and having Bitcoin on the balance sheet of those. And I think it's giving a lot more opportunities and optionality to companies that adopt Bitcoin now or early. Down the road, I think they're just going to have a lot more opportunities, whether it's M&A, whether it's, withstanding some severe downturns in the economy. I think there's just no harder asset to strengthen a balance sheet than to start accumulating some Bitcoin, and it can start small, right? I mean, if you have excess cash flows, I would just say, really, this is a serious asset class. Look seriously into allocating some of that excess cash flow to Bitcoin, because I think it will pay off down the road in terms of optionality. Yeah.
Grant, I meant to ask this earlier,
Yeah.
but how did you discern the difference between crypto and Bitcoin? Because you clearly understand that Bitcoin is really shouldn't even be considered a cryptocurrency. It does use cryptography
Right.
as a mechanism, but how did you discern that so early?
It's a good question. It's I when people say I'm into crypto, it just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was like, I'm not into crypto. It's Bitcoin, not crypto. It comes back to thinking about it financially, right? I was looking at the supply demand aspects, and I met people who came at it more from a technology standpoint, right? And they look at it very differently, right? So it's the complaint I would hear was but Bitcoin can't do that much, right? It doesn't do much. And they wanted, smart contracts, or they want this or that, bells and whistles. And so somebody very technologically minded that really wants the latest gadget, they might be more attracted to crypto. But I came at it from a financial, supply demand. This thing is capped. It has no elasticity. What a great investment opportunity. And then came to see it for much more than an investment. But yeah, it's not crypto. That, and I went to a couple of Web3 conferences about the time I didn't know the difference when I first got started. So when I talk about the people at the Bitcoin versus, I can't say that. Well, I mean, there's some great people. Well, I don't want to say, but it's a different culture, and so it was clear to me, that it was the Bitcoin people, and it's the Bitcoin, what it does or doesn't do. It doesn't need to do a lot to be hard money. Um, that's kind of how I thought about it, Mason.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Grant. I think the listeners are really going to appreciate your experience. And like I said, not every day do you see someone who spent 35 years, made it to the pinnacle of being a partner, and decide to move into Bitcoin. So I really appreciate you being here and being on our team. So I want to end it off with let the audience know where they can find you. If you're putting out any content, or if they want to connect with you for questions, go ahead and let them know.
Yeah, well, I haven't been very active in social media, but you can find me on X. That's probably the best place, and it's at Switzer Grant, just last name, first name. Yeah, no, this has been great. Look, I'm excited. I'm excited about Acropolis and helping out, and really look forward to working with you guys down the road.
Great.
So,
Thanks
Great.
for coming
Thank
on,
you.
Grant.
yeah, you're welcome. Okay, guys, take care.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. Quick reminder that New Foundations is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment, financial, or legal advice. Business owners, business operators, and those who are Bitcoin curious, let's connect. Visit acropolistreasury.com to learn more or to get in touch with our team.